I'm a farmer from north central South Dakota, and it's on the 45th parallel north of the equator is where my location's at. And I'm the 4th generation farmer, and we started no-tilling 33 years ago and started cover cropping 20 some years ago, and we use all 5 of the soil care principles on our farm to help us to improve the soils. And we've seen massive improvements in production, reductions in our inputs, and we've just seen real strong resilience to the adversities that Mother Nature can give us. Okay, when we started farming, it was my father used all the newest, latest, greatest technologies and tools for farming, and at that time the pace of production was not good enough to keep up with the expenses, and the farm went broke and we got foreclosure notices. So we started whole regenerative practices, which wasn't even a word back when we started, but we did it because of economics. We couldn't afford to do a lot of things. We couldn't afford the equipment. So we just started no-tilling, and we did that for 8 or 10 years, and everything rose, the yields went up. We didn't need as much labor. We didn't need as much horsepower. So that helped us immensely on those levels. And then we started noticing all kinds of saline issues on our field, alkali and stuff like that. So we were looking at how to get rid of those issues, and we started doing, because we have livestock on our farm, we started using living roots in those soils to help extract the moisture so it didn't migrate under the soils. And now we noticed our saline issues went away. So all these things were stepping stones to get to where we're at today. The support we'd got was almost negative support because it was so new, and I like to tell other farmers when we're successful at something we're doing. And if academia or anybody else was sitting in the audience, whether it was just at a table or whether it was at a speech, we kept getting the traditional ways of farming to say that doesn't work. You can't do that. We don't believe your numbers. And that was fine with me because it was paying my bills. They weren't paying my bills. I had to pay them. So as long as it was paying my bills, we continued. And then in the early 2000s, we had some university trials come to try to actually disprove it wasn't going to work. And what they found is it worked better than I was even saying. And now there was academia that blessed our practices, and it just kind of exploded. And at that time, then everybody wants to hear what you're doing. We have 7 employees. It's my son. He now owns the farm. I retired last year, and he's 100% owner. And myself, which I'm traveling a lot to other countries speaking and things like that. So I'm going a tremendous amount. And then he has 2 full-time employees and 3 part-time employees. And they're there from like March till the harvest is done in the fall, usually November. When we started farming, because we had no money, I soil tested because everybody said you should soil test, but my agronomists would say you need to buy this and this, and we had no money to buy it. So why spend the money on the soil tests if you can't buy the product they're recommending? So we quit soil testing everything. And then about 8-10 years ago, we decided to start soil testing everything because we're starting to get pushback real hard from academia saying this does not work. So now we soil test for everything everybody else does, which is your pH and your available nutrients, but we also soil test for total nutrients in the soil and total carbons, along with the soil organic matter carbons. So we test for all these things, and we test for the biological balances in our soils and biology respirations in our soil. We do all these tests, and we mark them. And we try to get them done every 90 days because we're trying to see how our soils breathe, and they breathe bigger in the summertime when things are growing than they do in the wintertime when things are resting. So with this, we found that our biologies were balanced on certain soils, and at that point in time we quit using all synthetic nutrients on those soils, and those soils productions went down a little bit, but not enough to offset the expense of all the synthetic inputs. So the profit was higher where we quit putting synthetic inputs on. And we're measuring the total carbons, and what we found is where we quit putting all synthetic inputs on, we've doubled our carbon levels in 3 years' time. How do I compare my yields to my neighbors, or how do I compare myself to my neighbors? And I get this question all the time. And one of the biggest pieces of mind I've ever gathered in agriculture is when I quit comparing myself to the neighbors, because we are so far ahead of the neighbors when it comes to everything. We drive on our fields when the neighbors get stuck on theirs. We plant when the neighbors can't. So we harvest massive crops where the neighbors are harvesting good crops, because everybody in the neighborhood is now doing no-till, and they're now doing rotations, but they haven't stepped into the 5 pillars of soil care yet. They're doing 3. Well, 10 years ago they were doing 2. And eventually they kind of, let's do what they're doing. So in a few more years they'll probably do 4 of the 5. And I'm the type guy that just goes, just do it, and we'll figure it out later, because I got bills to pay. And the bills have gotten paid very nicely over the course of the last 30 years of doing this. And it's only because I took care of my soils. Most people want to figure out what they want to do, and then they want to get their checkbook out and see if they can afford to do it. Can I afford to plant that crop? And if I can afford to plant it, can I afford to take care of it properly? So the checkbook, their money is always involved. And on our farm, because we learned how to farm without money has never been an equation in our farming operation. We do what's best for the soils first, what's best for the plants and animals second. And the funny thing is, if you never look for money, the money just comes to you, and your pocketbook gets full. But if you look at your pocketbook first, it never gets full. You're always chasing more. That's a very easy question to answer. You take the data of your total nutrients in your soil, not available. Because when I've recommended this to people around the world and they actually do it, most people have so much phosphorus, nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, and it just is unbelievable how much is there. And once people recognize how much is there, they're going to say to themselves, why am I purchasing more? Why don't I figure out how to access what I have? And then the next test is to figure out your biological balances, because they mediate that excess nutrient to the plants. But your total nutrients, you need to recommend them. Yes. We use PLFA testing because right now that tends to differentiate the families. The Haney tests and Sylvita and those tests like that, they just tell you have very active biology. But if it's only bacteria, you're not going to have a system that feeds itself. If you have the fungal to bacteria ratios in a proper rate, now your protozoas and nematodes and all them secondaries come alive, and they're the ones that actually cycle the nutrients back to your plants. So